Okay, we're going to start. Today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia, daf Yud Ches, okay? 18.
Okay.
We're going to start from the Mishnah on daf Yud Ches. So it's going to be a lighter, shorter daf today because we're starting from already the Mishnah on daf Yud Ches. So the Mishnah begins. Motza, if a man found Gite Noshim, somebody's divorce document, okay? You shouldn't return it. Why? Don't return it to the woman because and even though she says I lost it, we are concerned that maybe the husband just wrote the document but never gave it to her. So don't return it. If you find a divorce document, don't give it to the lady. Same thing is shechrurei avadim. If you find a freedom document, right? That's somebody wanted to free his Evet Knani, his Goyish slave. So again, don't return it. Why? Because maybe the master thought about freeing his slave, but never really gave the slave the document. So if you find it on the floor, don't return it. Daitik. Dait is a savoa. In other words, it's like if a person who is a shchiv mera, which means he's about to pass on, and he says, "I want to give a gift to somebody," and just write it and give it to the recipient. That let's say you want to gift him your field, so you write it on a piece of paper, and you're supposed to give it to the recipient. Well, find it on the floor. Don't give it to the recipient because maybe the shchiv mera never consummated it. He thought about giving somebody a gift, but changed his mind. Same thing, matana, regular gift. Somebody's gifting a property to somebody, don't give it back. This shoivrim, and shoivrim is a receipt. Now here, if let's say you have a receipt that a husband paid the ksuba. Let's say you have a receipt that the husband paid a ksuba to his divorced wife. Don't give it to the husband because maybe he didn't pay for the ksuba and they just wrote the receipt early. So again, all these things, there's a mitzvah of hashavas aveda. When you find something, return it. Here, the mitzvah is not to return it. Why? Because I will tell you, ksuvin hoya, these things were written up. And the person who wrote them up changed his mind not to give it. So therefore, let's say we'll just take one example. You find a get on the floor, don't give it to the woman, even though it says her name that she's getting divorced, but maybe the husband wrote it up and never decided to give it to her. Says the Gemara. It's only because we are concerned that maybe the husband decided not to give it to her. What happens if the husband's right there and sees you find this get, and he says, you know what? Ha'amatnu. If he says, give it to her, noisdim, we will give it that, even though he says, give it to her right now. Now, this is a very big thing because perhaps, even though he says, give it to her, perhaps you're not giving the get that was written lishma. In other words, we have, when you write a get, it has to be written the names of the person and the whole document has to be written lishma. And therefore, even if it says Ruvain is divorcing Rachel, perhaps this was a get belonging to somebody else that Reuven's divorcing Rachel. So if you're using that document, you might be using a puzzle of get. But the Mishnah's mashma, it's only because the husband doesn't agree that he divorced his wife. But if he says, after you find the divorce document, give it to this lady, we will give it to the lady, even if this get was found long after it was lost. In other words, you can see that it was lying on the floor for a long time. You would still be able to pick it up. And if the husband says, give it to her, give it to her. And we assume that the husband really was the one that wrote this get. And maybe he's wanting to divorce his wife right now with this get, even though he never gave it to her, but he could divorce his wife. And we're not concerned that maybe the get was written shaloi lishma. Maybe it was written for somebody else with the same name. Says the Gemara, Uraminhu. Then I'll ask you a contradiction. Mishnah says in Masechta Gittin, Hamevi get v'avad heimenu. Someone, a shliach, brings a get from another country, and he lost it. Maybe he was a shlemiyah. He brought it to Eretz Yisrael, and he just lost it. So then, mitzoy la'alta, if he finds it like very quickly after he lost it, let's say he lost it an hour later, he finds the get, kasha, he could still re-give the get to the woman. Im la, but if it took so long time till you found the get, pasul, he's puzzled from giving that get because even though he found it eventually, but I assume that the one he found was actually somebody else's get with the same name. So we have a stira. How come our Mishnah implies that you can give the get that was lost, even Lizman Maruba, even if you find it a long time after it was lost? And here, this Mishnah, Masechta Gittin, says that no, if it's only if you find it right away is it kosher. But if you don't find it right away, the get is possible. Amar Rabba said, Loi Kasha, it's not difficult between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Gittin. This is the Mishnah in Gittin, okay? Kan b'mokom sharis mitzuyos. In the Mishnah Gittin, it's a public station. There's a lot of caravans coming back and forth. And therefore, very possible that this get belongs to somebody else, right? It's very possible that this get belonged to somebody else. You just happen to the finder happened to find somebody else's get with the same name. So therefore, don't return it to the husband who's claiming it's his get or to the woman, even though they both agree, because perhaps you found somebody else's get. Kan b'mokoim she'ein shayares mitzuyos. When there is no caravans, it's not so public. There's not too many people passing by. So, and our Mishnah is talking about where there's not too many people passing by. So even if you find get and it's a long time, it looks like it was lost there for a long time, but it's not really a place where many people go. So we can assume that the get that you found belonged to this man who claims it's his. And if he tells you now, give it to my wife, we will follow through and give it to his wife. And says the Gemara, and this is the Gemara talking, not Rabbah. Even in the Mishnah in Gittin, that we are concerned that if it's a Zman Meruba, if it's a long time since it was lost, the get is possible. And you're saying that in a place where there's a lot of people coming, so it means that we have to make certain that there was another person with the same name from the same city. So when you pick up the document, the fact that there's a lot of caravans coming through is not enough to passel the get, even if it's a long time that the get was lost. We have to pick up the get, look at the city where the get was written. And if that city is a big city or whatever, and we know for a fact that there are many people having the same name, then the get is possible. Even if the husband said, oh, it's my get, we're not so sure it's your get. Maybe it was somebody else's get with the same name. But if we don't know for certain, we don't have an assumption that there was somebody with the same name from that city. In other words, he has a very strange name. So then then we can assume that it really belongs to the guy who claims that this get belongs to him, even if it's Zman Meruba. So you need two things to pass the get. One is shayaros mitzuyos, and two is v'hu shehochzaku shnei Yosef ben Shimon bir achas. Says the Gemara, when the bottom of Daf Yudches Amar Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom, the 4 lines. The Eloi Tema Hachi, if you're not going to say what I just said, Kashia de Rabba, then I'll have a contradiction of Rabba on Rabba. If you're going to say that when you find a get on the floor, and you can assume that maybe it's not the right get. The guy says, oh, it's my get, give it to my wife. Rabba said, there'll be a contradiction to Rabba. If you're going to say that just the fact that there's a lot of people passing through apostles the get, it will be a contradiction to Rabba. Let's listen to this story. Dahu Gita, there was this get, the Shtakach Beidina de Rav Huna, that was found around the court of Rav Huna. Rav Huna had a building with a courtroom, and he was the judge. And a lot of people came and went in that building, and therefore that's like Shayares Mitsuyas. That's like a place where there's a lot of foot traffic. So they found the get on the floor. The Havakasabe, it was written in the Gretz, B'Shavisi Masa Darochas Nara, that the place where the get was written is called Shaviri Masa, the city Shviri, which is next to Rochas Nara, which is next to the river Rochas. Okay, so let's say the get said Reuven is divorcing his wife Rachel. So, and there's a guy Reuven says, "Oh, it's my get. I just dropped it in the courthouse of Rav Huna." Rav Huna said, "Not so fast. Maybe not give it back to him." Amar Rav Huna said, we go to Amud Beis, Chayshin in Lishnei Shviri. That means we concerned that there are two shviris over here, and maybe this get that you found was a shviri in another location. The city is another location, which so happens to have people with the same name. So therefore, it's not this guy who claims it's his. It's maybe it's by luck. It's from another place, and it was written shloi lishma. You can't just give it to this guy who claims that the get is his. Rav Chizda, who's a student of Rav Huna, said to Rabba, who's also a student of Rav Huna, Puk Ayinba, let's examine what Rav Huna just said. The Le'urta Rav Huna is going to ask you a question. What's your opinion on the matter? You see, Rav Huna is very machmir. What are the chances of finding a get on the floor of Rav Huna's place? And Rav Huna is saying, maybe, even though it says the city name on it, you're concerned that maybe in another dimension, there's a similar city with the same name, with the same Ruvain divorcing Rachel. So maybe this is not your get. So do you agree with that? So Rabba Nafak Ach Tak V'Ashkach. Rabba went and he found. What did he find? He found a Tnan in a Mishnah, Kol Maaseh Bezdin Harei Yachzer. He found something like this. Any story of Bezdin, anything that you came to Bezdin, and Bezdin gave a stamp that it's a kosher star, Harei Yachzer, you return it. You return it to the guy who claims it's his, no questions asked. Now, this document was found in Rav Huna's courtyard. It was an approved kosher document. So basically, what Rabba said, by the way, that the Mishnah disagrees with Rav Huna. If the Mishnah says if you find something in a courthouse, you return it to the claimant. So it's not like Rav Huna, who said, oh, maybe the claimant is making a mistake. Maybe it's another shviri. You're not worried about that. The Mishnah says if you find something in a courthouse and it has a kosher symbol on it, return it to whoever claims it's his. Now, the Rabbah said return it. But even so, but in the house of Rav Huna, in the courtyard of Rav Huna, there's plenty of foot traffic. The Kapashat Rabbah said, return it to the guy who claims it to him. So then the question is, but Rabbah always says that once there's a lot of foot traffic, don't return the get. So the answer is right. It depends. Rabbah needs, in order not to return a get, you have to, first of all, there has to be a lot of foot traffic where the get was found. So maybe it's a different get. But plus, you pick up the get and look where the city is. And if we know for a fact that there are people in that city that have the same names, then, only then, you don't return it. Alma, so we see from here, only if you know for a fact there's somebody in that city has the same name, and yes, in that case, you would not return the get. Eloi, but if you don't, Loi, then you won't be worried about it. And even though there's a lot of foot traffic, you could return it to the person that claims it's his. Ovid, Rabbah, and Rabbah Dak Uvadah. Rabbah, in his own psak, in his own decisions, law decisions, he paskined that way. Beikituna de Pumpadisa, in the flax house of Pumpadisa, I guess in there was a flax market, and there was a get found there, and Rabbah returned it to the person who said, it was my get, I wanted to give it to my wife. And why did Rabbah return it? Maybe it was written shloi lishma, because we looked at the place, and we didn't know that there was somebody with the same name from that city. Kish might say, like Rabbah just said. Others say, it was the place where, so what does Beit Kitana mean? Either they sell flax there, and the reason why he returned it, the fact is, even though there was a lot of foot traffic in the flax market, but the place that the get is from a city where we don't know for sure that there are people that have the same name that are written in this get. Others say, it's a place where they soak flax, and it was a private place. So, and you picked up the get, even though I know for a fact that there are many people that have the same name from that city, there's a lot of Ruvains in that city, and there's a lot of Rachels from that city. So in this get that says the city name, and it says Ruvain is divorcing Rachel, and this guy Ruvain says it's my get, you would return it to him because the loy shchicha sheyares. There was no lot of foot traffic where this get was found. Okay, so that's what Rabba's rule is, that you need two things in order not to return the get. One, you have to have there's a lot of foot traffic, and therefore, and the city where the get is written has many people with the same names, and only then you will say maybe it's not the get of the person that claims it's his. Says the Gemara, Rab Zera Rami Masnisin Abraisai. Rab Zera asked the same question that Rabba asked, but from a Mishnah to a Braisa. Umashani, and then he answered it. Tanan, we learned in this Mishnah, not from a Braisa and our Mishnah, but another Braisa. Hamevi get va'ave menu. Person. So this is the Mishnah we saw before. If a person brings a get from Medina Sayyam and he brings it to Israel and then he lost it, if he finds it right away, it's kosher. He could reuse that get. But if it took some time till he found it, possible the get is possible, because we assume that he found the wrong get. Uraminu, then I'll ask you a stira. Matzah gets isha bashuk. If you find a get isha in the city, bisman shabal moida yachsel isha. If the Baal says, "Oh, it's my get," you could give it to that lady. You give it to the lady. Eina Baal moitza. But if the Baal says, "Oh, I never gave a get to my wife," lo yachsel lo lezeh lo lezeh. You don't give it back to the husband, and you don't give it back to the wife. But you have a partial quote that says bisman shahabal moida. But if the husband says, "Oh, it's my get," and you could give it to my former wife, yachsel, you would give it to the woman. Even if this get was found it was lost for a long time, you would still give it to the woman. Why? You say zman meruba, you don't return the get. So how could you differentiate? Umashani and Rab Zera, who asked the stira, kan b'mokam she'sharis mitzuyas, v'kan b'mokam she'ein she'aris mitzuyas. Mishnah in Gittin that says don't return it is because it's talking about a place where there's a lot of foot traffic, a lot of caravans pass through. So maybe you could assume it's not the same get that he claims was lost was the same get that was found, even though the names are similar. But Kam, in the other place where it says that you could return it, even if it looks like the get was lost for a long time, because the get where it was found was a place where there's not foot traffic there. So we can assume that the person who lost it, this is the get that was actually found. And according to that, the others say that Rab Zera agreed to Rabbah, that the only time you don't return it is you need two things. One, shashayaris mitzuyas, you need that there's a lot of foot traffic, and also you look at the document and there's you know for a fact that people from that city have the same name, which is exactly what Rabbah said. You need both conditions in order not to return the get. But others say, even though you don't know for sure that there's the people with the same name from that city, the fact that there's a lot of foot traffic, don't give it back to the guy who claims it's his, because maybe it's not his get that was found, it was somebody else's get. Well, Pligi the Rabbah, and they would disagree with what Rabbah said. So now the Gemara asks one or two questions. Bishlam Rabbah, Amak Rab Zera. It's understandable why Rabbah did not say like Rab Zera. He asked a stira from two Mishnayos, our Mishnah in Gittin and our Mishnah in Masechta Bava Metzia. He came to the conclusion because it's nice to ask a contradiction from one Mishnah to another Mishnah, because a Mishnah is more certain of its authenticity, because if it made it into the Mishnayos, it must be true. And therefore, he didn't want to ask a Mishnah to a Braisa. Why did Rabbi Zera ask the same question of Rabbah, the Mishnah in Gittin to the Mishnah Bava Metzia? Why do you have to ask the same stira from a Mishnah in Gittin to another Braisa somewhere else? And Braisa is not always authentic. Amalach, he said, Rabbi Zera will tell you, he did not want to ask the question from our Mishnah to the Mishnah in Gittin, because Mikatani, if you look closely at our Mishnah, doesn't Mishnah say does our Mishnah really say that if he says tnu, you give it even for a long period of time? Did our Mishnah say that you will, if the husband says give it, you'll give it? Maybe our Mishnah says tnu, you give it, but you give it right away. So it doesn't mean you give it you could give it after a long period of time. Maybe our Mishnah agrees with the Mishnah in Gittin, so it's not such a stira between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Gittin. Continues the Gemara. One version had it that Rab Zera said was very strict, and he said as long as there's a lot of foot traffic, as you don't return the get, even though you don't know for certain that in the city where the get was written, there's somebody else with the same name. You don't return it. So why would Rabbah require that you need Hochsaku Shnei Yosef ben Shimon, that you need two people with the same name not to return it? And Rab Zera does not require that. Rabbah says, the Tani, Kol Maise Bezdin Reise Yachsa. There's a Mishnah that says anytime you find something in the Bezdin house, you return it. So, if you find a document in the courthouse and the guy says, "Oh, it's mine," give it to him. And Bezdin is a place where there's a lot of foot traffic. And so why do you return it? If the fact that foot traffic alone is something to passel a document, so if you find a get in a courthouse, you should not be returning it. The answer is because the Mishnah is only the Mishnah is saying if you know for a certain that there's some people with the same name, then you don't return it. But if it's not, you're not sure that you don't know for certain that there are people that have the same name, yachser, then you were to return it. And therefore, when it says yachser, it's talking about loy huchsaku. If we don't know for sure that people have the same name from that city. Rab Zera Amalach, Rab Zera says, no. Mikitani kol maisi bezin shnimtzu bevezin. Is that talking about a document that was found in a courthouse? Kol maisi bezdin yachser. The document is talking about wherever you find a maisi bezdin, you return it. But when do you return it? If you find it in a place where it's a remote place, where there's a lot of foot traffic. But if you have a lot of foot traffic, even though you don't know for certain that people from that city have the same name, you still will be concerned not to return the document, especially a get, because a get has to be written lishma, and you're always concerned that maybe you found the guy claims it's his, but maybe you found a different document that's so similar with names, and it's not his, and therefore he can't reuse it to give it to his wife. Gemara gives two more terutzim. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Kagoyin, the Omre Edim, the reason you could return a document, if Edim say, if the witnesses that signed on the document say, we only signed on one document with this exact name. So again, if the Gedim agree that they're very limited in where they signed, so they basically say, this is the get that really belongs to this man who claims it's his. So the Gemara says, so what's the idea? What's the chiddush that you return it? Of course, you have so much proof that it belongs to this man who claims it's his. So the Gemara says, the same, I would have thought, maybe you'll find a get that has the same names, same city, and same Edim, but in another dimension. You can have Reuven divorcing Rachel in Manhattan with the two Edim, but maybe there's another Manhattan somewhere else that has Reuven divorcing Rachel with Edim that have the same name. So maybe you're concerned that that's the get that you found and that was not the same thing, that it's his. Kamash Malan, that's really too much of a stretch, and therefore you could return it. Rav Ashi says that when you return a document to a man, let's say a get that was found, Rav Ashi says if the only time you return a document is kigoin de ko omar nekav yesh b'tzad ois ploinis. He gave a definitive siman that proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that it belongs to him. If the man says there's a hole in this document, on this letter in the document, in the get, there's like a little hole or something like that, which is definitive. So then it's a very good siman. So then you could return it back to him, and you, of course, you assume he's telling the truth. But if he gives you a definitive sign that he says there's a hole, right by this letter, if he says there's a hole in the document, loy, because that's not a good enough siman to prove that it belongs to that person. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi misafkala. Rav Ashi wasn't sure. Simonim either raisi either rabbanim. He doesn't know that the simonim that the Torah says return a item to somebody who claims it's his, if it's minat Torah. If it's minat Torah, then you don't need a definitive mark. Even a non even a even a non even a even a non definitive mark, you return it. Or maybe it's the Rabbanan, and therefore the rabbis say if you give a non-definitive mark, then only it works by returning a lost wallet or a lost watch. Then you return it to the guy. But to return a get, which could lead to Issa Daraisa, because if you might be giving the get, a puzzle get to somebody who's going to reuse to divorce his wife, maybe I won't rely on a siman that's not definitive, only if it's a siman that is definitive. So we'll discuss more about this tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem. So we just finished Daf Yud Ches.